February 5th, 2008. America braced for a historic election night, casting ballots and hoping for change. But as political futures hung in the balance, the atmosphere above prepared its own reckoning. A rare February setup that would unleash 87 tornadoes across 9 states. In a single night, 57 lives were lost, families torn apart, schools emptied, and warnings debated as minutes turned lethal. When democracy met devastation, nature, not voters, held the final say. What invisible forces transformed a routine Tuesday into a battleground between civic hope and unstoppable ruin? This is the story of the Super Tuesday tornado outbreak and the warnings that came before the sirens. By sunrise on February 5th, 2008, meteorologists across the Mid-South were tracking numbers that simply did not belong in winter. Temperatures climbed into the 70s, dew points hovered above 60 degrees, and a powerful jet stream roared overhead. For early February, this was a rare collision of warmth and cold, an atmospheric powder keg. Dr. Greg Carbon at the Storm Prediction Center called it a textbook setup for a major outbreak. Forecast models agreed. The ingredients for violent storms, instability, moisture, and extreme wind shear were stacked perfectly across Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi. The Storm Prediction Center issued a high-risk outlook, only the second time that level of alert had been declared in February since records began in 1998. Meteorologists watched as CAPE values, which measure the energy available for storms, reached summer-like levels. At the same time, winds several thousand feet above ground shifted direction and speed, creating the wind shear needed for supercells, the rotating storms that can spawn long-track tornadoes. In conference calls and internal chats, forecasters discussed not just the likelihood of tornadoes, but the potential for them to be strong, fast-moving, and long-lived. That morning, a new kind of warning took center stage. Polygon-based alerts, designed to target only the most threatened areas. By drawing these precise shapes, meteorologists could focus urgent messages where they mattered most, reducing unnecessary alarm for others. As the day unfolded, the science pointed in one direction. Everything was primed for a historic outbreak. The warnings were clear. The question was, who would listen, and who would be in harm's way? Across the Mid-South, daily routines pressed on. In Memphis, parents weighed the threat against the hassle of early pickups. Some after-school programs were canceled, but city life stayed in motion. Newsrooms debated whether to break into Super Tuesday coverage, knowing every second of election night meant ad revenue and audience numbers. The weather warnings crawled along the bottom of TV screens, easy to ignore for viewers glued to the political horse race. At Union University in Jackson, Tennessee, classes continued as scheduled. Students filled dorm lounges and study halls, focused on assignments and primary returns. Julie Boyer moved quietly through her day, uneasy. She packed a bag with bottled water, a flashlight, and extra clothes, just in case. Friends teased her for over-preparing. She shrugged it off, but the feeling lingered. In rural Pope County, Arkansas, the Cherry family finished chores before sunset. Jimmy and Dana checked weather updates, but with no siren sounding and no sky turning green, they stayed home with their daughter Emmy. The day felt ordinary, even as meteorologists issued more urgent alerts. Risk, for most, was still abstract, a problem for someone else, somewhere else. By late afternoon, the calm held. Election workers watched the radar on break. TV producers weighed the risk of losing viewers to a false alarm. Across towns and campuses, the warnings grew sharper, but life moved forward, each choice quietly stacking the odds for what would come next. At 5:02 p.m., a tornado touched down in Pope County, Arkansas. The storm carved a path across rural land, gathering strength with every mile. Meteorologists later measured its track at 122 miles, longer than any tornado Arkansas had ever recorded in February. Winds intensified as the funnel crossed open fields and scattered homes, quickly reaching the force of an EF3. For Jimmy and Dana Cherry and their 9-year-old daughter Emmy, there was little warning. Their manufactured home sat just outside Atkins, directly in the tornado's path. Within seconds, the structure was lifted, torn apart, and scattered across the countryside. Only the concrete pad remained. All 3 members of the Cherry family died instantly, the first lives lost that night. The tornado moved on, crossing highways and sweeping cars from Interstate 40. Emergency calls poured in from drivers caught in the chaos, reporting vehicles tossed from the roadway and debris raining down. In Van Buren County, the storm reached its peak, churning at EF4 intensity, with winds estimated near 200 miles per hour. Homes were flattened, trees stripped bare, and entire neighborhoods vanished in the roar. Survey teams later found entire stretches where nothing but foundations and splintered timber marked where families had lived. Over 200 homes and businesses were destroyed along its course, with losses in the tens of millions. 13 people died in Arkansas that evening, the deadliest toll from a single tornado in the state in over a decade. For many, the warnings had come too late or felt too distant. The Cherry family's story became a symbol of how quickly an ordinary day could unravel, and how even the best forecasts could not guarantee safety when the sky turned violent. At 5:30 p.m., the tornado reached the southern edge of Memphis. Within minutes, a swirl of debris swept across the runways at Memphis International Airport. Airport staff rushed travelers into interior hallways as alarms echoed through the terminals. On the tarmac, winds strong enough to move a Boeing 737 sent ground crews scrambling for cover. The FedEx Express World Hub, the largest air cargo sorting facility in the world, sat directly in the tornado's path. As the storm roared overhead, a hangar roof peeled away and several planes shifted from their moorings. Conveyor belts ground to a halt. For a company that promises overnight delivery, even a few hours of downtime meant thousands of delayed packages and a ripple effect across the global supply chain. Warehouse workers in the airport's industrial zone had no time to react. The tornado tore through 3 warehouses, flattening metal walls and sending pallets flying. In one of these buildings, 3 employees lost their lives when the structure collapsed around them. 13 more people across the city were injured, including several at the Hickory Ridge Mall, where a wall caved in and the roof partially collapsed. Power failed for more than 65,000 homes and businesses, leaving entire neighborhoods in darkness just as emergency crews mobilized. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado emergency for Memphis, a rare warning reserved for the most dangerous situations. Live radar feeds showed a tight velocity couplet, a classic sign of a tornado embedded within a supercell. For the first time, the city's modern warning systems were put to the test against a direct urban strike. As the tornado lifted northeast of the airport, it left behind a trail of mangled steel, shattered glass, and a logistics network thrown into chaos. The city's ability to recover would depend not just on technology, but on the people working through the night to restore order. Shift workers, first responders, and utility crews became the backbone of Memphis's response as the night pressed on, with more storms still on the horizon. At 7:02 p.m., a low roar swept across Union University's campus. Power vanished in an instant, plunging dorms into darkness. Julie Boyer stood in the hallway, heart pounding, as the building trembled. She shouted, "Get in the bathtub now!" her voice cutting through confusion and disbelief. Students packed into bathroom cores, clutching pillows, heads ducked beneath mattresses. Walls vibrated, then buckled. Ceiling tiles dropped. The wind howled outside, louder than anything most had ever heard. On the second floor of Jelks Hall, Heather Martin tried to pull her roommate down just as the windows exploded. Her ears popped from the pressure. The world shrank to a few square feet of tile and cold porcelain. For almost a minute, the structure groaned and flexed. Metal twisted overhead. Furniture tumbled down hallways. In Waters Commons, a group of friends pressed together in a cramped bathroom, feeling the floor shift beneath them. Panic ricocheted off the walls, but the bathroom core held. The reinforced plumbing walls, designed decades earlier for privacy, now shielded them from collapse. In the chaos, one student counted breaths, another whispered a prayer, and someone's phone, buried deep in a pocket, kept vibrating with warning alerts no one could answer. When the noise finally faded, the silence was almost as terrifying. Julie Boyer's flashlight beam cut through dust. She called out names, waiting for replies in the darkness. Doors jammed, debris blocked the exits, but voices answered, one by one, then in clusters. Heather Martin realized her legs were pinned, but she was alive. Across campus, dozens crawled from bathrooms and stairwells, dazed but unbroken. Emergency lights flickered on, revealing a landscape of shattered glass, missing roofs, and twisted cars outside. Against every statistical odd, every student on campus had survived. In those few minutes, the difference between life and death came down to a doorframe, a bathtub, and a warning heeded at the last possible moment. Emergency calls flooded Jackson's dispatch center as the tornado cleared Union University. Within minutes, Captain Lehman and his team from the Jackson Fire Department arrived to a campus transformed into a maze of debris and splintered buildings. Downed power lines and blocked roads forced firefighters to abandon their trucks and move in on foot, carrying axes, saws, and medical kits. On the north side of Jelks Hall, voices called for help from beneath collapsed ceilings. Lehman radioed instructions, dividing his crew to search every dorm by hand. Protocols demanded caution: unstable walls, live wires, the threat of a secondary collapse. But time was critical. Inside Waters Commons, David Wilson, a biology major, found himself trapped with a friend beneath a tangle of pipes and shattered drywall. Despite a bleeding arm, Wilson calmed his friend and pressed his phone's flashlight against the floor, signaling rescuers. Firefighters tunneled through the rubble, prying open a narrow void and pulling both students to safety. Wilson would later credit the first aid training he'd received as an RA for keeping panic at bay. That night, the lessons stuck with him, planting the seed for a future in medicine. Throughout the evening, firefighters crawled through shattered hallways, calling out names, listening for knocking and faint voices. In one suite, a group of students huddled together, emerging only when Lehman himself cleared the doorway and reassured them it was going to be all right. By midnight, every student had been accounted for, some with broken bones, some in shock, but all alive. The bathroom cores and reinforced stairwells had shielded them from the worst. As the rescue teams carried the last students out into the cold, rain-soaked night, the campus community gathered in the dining hall, shaken but whole. The absence of fatalities, against all odds, was quietly acknowledged as a miracle. For Captain Lehman and David Wilson, the ordeal forged a bond that would outlast the storm. And for the university, the night's salvation became a story of courage, resolve, and the enduring power of neighbors helping neighbors. As midnight drew closer, a new tornado took shape in the darkness over northern Tennessee. Unlike the earlier storms, this one would not be seen until it was already upon its victims. By 10 p.m., radar tracked a supercell racing east, its rotation tightening as it crossed into Macon County. The tornado touched down near Lafayette, carving a 51-mile path through farmland and small communities. Most families were already in bed. For those living in mobile homes, shelter options were few. Michelle Qualls remembers the moment her world changed. "Our home exploded, going round and round," she recalled. The walls lifted, the floor vanished, and she found herself tumbling through debris, clutching her baby as wind and splinters filled the air. When the storm passed, she was still alive, her infant daughter too. But their home had disappeared. Sheriff Mark Gammons arrived minutes later, flashlight beam cutting through the wreckage. He described the scene simply, like a war zone. Power lines tangled in the trees, cars twisted in ditches, and entire blocks flattened. Neighbors called out for loved ones, searching for anyone who might have survived the collapse. Over the next hour, rescuers uncovered the full extent of the devastation. 22 people died along the tornado's track, including an 11-month-old girl found alive in a field, wrapped in a blanket. For many, the warnings came too late or failed to reach them as they slept. In the rural quiet, the storm's violence was total, a reminder that after dark, even the best forecasts can't always save those in the path. At 3:02 in the morning, a NOAA weather radio blared to life in Willard Tucker's bedroom in northern Alabama. The shrill alarm jolted him awake. Seconds later, the voice on the radio warned of a tornado on the ground, heading straight for his community. Tucker and his family scrambled out of bed and rushed to their storm shelter, barely making it inside before the roar began. By the time they emerged, their mobile home was gone, reduced to a field of twisted metal and scattered belongings. Tucker would later say, "Weather radio saved my life." That early morning tornado was rated EF4, one of the strongest of the outbreak. The warning had arrived just in time, but for many others, the outcome was different. Despite advances in radar and communication, the numbers told a sobering story. 63% of the people killed that night died in mobile homes, even though those homes made up only 7% of the region's housing. The risk wasn't just the strength of the tornadoes, but the vulnerability of the structures in their path. Across the South, the average warning lead time had climbed to 17 minutes, an enormous leap from the 5-minute average in the 1970s. Sirens, text alerts, and weather radios reached more people than ever before. But as Tucker's story showed, survival often hinged on a single decision: whether to act when the warning came. Technology had raised the odds, but it couldn't guarantee safety for everyone. For families in mobile homes, the gap between warning and shelter remained dangerously wide. The outbreak forced a reckoning, not just with nature's power, but with the limits of preparedness and the stubborn risks that technology alone couldn't erase. On February 5th and 6th, 2008, 87 tornadoes struck 9 states, leaving 57 people dead and hundreds injured, even as millions voted on Super Tuesday. Early warnings, including the new polygon alerts and a rare February high-risk forecast, saved lives at places like Union University, where 1,200 students survived, despite 80% campus destruction. Yet, 63% of fatalities occurred in mobile homes, just 7% of housing, showing persistent vulnerability. The cause and effect is clear. Better alerts and local action can mean survival, but unequal shelter access remains a risk. Some questions, like why warnings went unheeded in certain communities, are still studied by meteorologists and emergency managers. Today, forecasters use lessons from this outbreak to shape response plans and warning systems nationwide. As survivor David Wilson later said, "February 5th revealed life's frailty to me." The Super Tuesday tornado outbreak stands as proof that, even amid progress, nature's power demands constant vigilance.